On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we'll talk with research firm IHS about some of their predictions for carrier spending plans on NFV and SDN deployments.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com.
This week, we are joined by Michael Howard, who's the Senior Research Director for Carrier Networks at IHS, to talk a bit about, obviously, NFV and SDN and get some insight from Michael on the market. Michael, hey, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. I'm glad to be here.
Great. Well, obviously, for those who don't know, IHS has been covering this space for quite a while and providing lots of great insight into what's happening in the market. I know for myself, I've been dipping into your guys' research often for a lot of my stories. So I definitely appreciate at least that part of what you guys have been doing for the market. But let's maybe talk a bit about, I guess, maybe an overview of just your general view of kind of where we are in terms of NFV and SD deployments. And obviously, it's been talked about for years now. There's been a lot of POCs going on. What's your general view of kind of where we are today in terms of this move towards virtualization for telecom operators?
Yeah, good question, Dan, just to set the big picture. Yeah. So 2013 was what we called the year of POCs. The prominent news, what was really happening, where the action was proof of concept tests, carriers joining with a number of vendors for each proof of concept. Then in 2014, that continued. Although we had a few small real-world deployments in 2014. 2015 is a year when we're seeing a lot more commercial live deployments. So there's still a lot of POCs going on. There's a lot of tests going on in the lab, and yet there's a number of deployments. But the deployments are on the range of between 10 and 20. It's not like hundreds. So today, the bulk of the activity is still in developing the right software for each problem that's being solved. And you can really look at a proof of concept of not proving all of SDN and NFV. In order to solve anything, you got to focus on one little problem or one area, a contained domain, we call it. And that's what carriers have been doing. You got to bite off a small chunk. Let's solve that, get it going. And so even moving those small proof of concept, the small area, into live commercial deployment has proved to be a big task, because the lab is very different than the live environment. And the live environment is one thing, but there's all of the operational procedures. People know how to set up a service. Well, they did. Now there's SDN and NFV. What do we do? And in fact, NFV brings an even bigger range of problems because, hey, servers, that's not network equipment. Oh, storage. Oh, switches there's a rack of servers and storage. What do we do with that? That's IT's problem, not us network folks. So there's a lot of issues, a lot of learning going on. But it's what has to happen to get to the real goals.
Yeah, that's a great point. You're right. I mean, it did seem like, 2014 and 2013 was a lot of announcements, a lot of partnerships going on. But you're right. It does seem like at least maybe we're starting to get to some of these, like you're saying, some small commercial deployments. Obviously, I've talked to a lot of operators. I know you have as well. A lot of these guys are really pushing this pretty heavy too. I mean, a lot of companies, domestically, AT&T is really big with it. Telefonica is big with it. So you get a lot of these kind of these bigger operators are really pushing this. But you're right, though. It does seem like there are so many challenges involved in this. I mean, this is not a simple move. This is like really a whole change of operations for these operators. That just seems like, to think it's going to happen overnight is obviously not possible. It's just a lot going on right now in the space, trying to keep up with what's happening.
Yeah, and so you mentioned AT&T and Telefonica. There's others, British Telecom, China Telecom, China Mobile, NTT in Japan. A lot of big operators have signed on. Deutsche Telekom have signed on in a big way. And they've done early projects. And all of these big corporations, all these big service providers have corporate commitment from the top down. The only way they can rolling out a commercial service is top-down commitment. And so we certainly see that very vocally from AT&T. We see it from Deutsche Telekom, et cetera. And yet, where are all the deployments? NTT had some early on, but there was very limited. Again, it was customers ordering cloud services in certain multiple data centers. It was very narrow application. In fact, they built the application on top of their existing network. They used SDN and everything, so they learned something, but it was very much a contained domain. AT&T has probably done the broadest rollout, 100 markets, Ethernet services. They're going to add IPVPN. They're going to add firewalls and a bunch of other services that the customers can access, can buy via a portal. And so there's a lot of automation already in there.
Yeah.
But if you look at it, that's, again, kind of a special construct on top of AT&T's networks. But it's real service. They've changed a lot of things. But it took a corporate commitment from top down to make this happen across the whole organization.
Yeah, that's a big part of it, obviously. I mean, I guess as you look at kind of, I guess, the pace of deployment, I mean, is it a matter of just trying to, I guess, get SDN and NFV to work in a carrier environment? Because it does seem like these technologies have been around to an extent in data centers and in various other platforms. But obviously, this move towards telecom it's a pretty big move, because I mean, operators have certain service level requirements, and they've got the whole carrier grade issue, and people expect something from their telecom operator. And it seems like this is, trying to, let this stuff all be taken over by software and automation. It's a big commitment, and it's, there's a trust factor involved. Has that been kind of the biggest challenge, just getting, I guess, this stuff moved towards what carriers really need? Has that been kind of maybe the hold up to this process?
Well, you named a lot of the challenge, definitely. And I'm not sure you can name one top challenge. When we asked the service providers this year, what are the top challenges, they named two in particular. One, they see that the software that's available is not carrier grade yet.
Yeah.
On the other hand, a number of operators are saying, we're going with what is available. We're going to make it work in these contained domains. Well, the second big problem that carriers named, almost as many said, it was a majority of operators saying, it's our own network, our own process, our own procedures that are the impediment. How do we change all of those? So even if we could buy perfect software today, we'd still have, how do we change how we operate? So those are the two biggest ones. And then narrowing down or looking down a little deeper about NFV in particular, data centers have been working for a long time, and well-known technologies, servers, compute, storage, switching, it all works. However, now with NFV, it's not just those physical devices. Now it's layers and layers, and I have to say, and layers and layers software to make something work. And it's multi-vendor, and it goes on. There's orchestration, there's control. Actually, there's multiple layers of orchestration just in NFV. There is service orchestration, where you worry about the different VNFs. What service are you actually delivering? But then there's the application. Well, let's just talk about the NFVI, the infrastructure. There's orchestration for the physical NFV infrastructure. So there's a service level orchestration and infrastructure level orchestration. And this is just within the NFV architecture. How do you make it all work? It's tricky. So, I mean, it's just not easy. It's going to be easy in the future, but everybody's learning. The carriers are learning, the vendors are learning, and we're all learning what's going on and what's not going on.
Yeah, true.
But I think the industry's running as fast as it can. I think I don't want to use the industry's going all out to make this happen.
Yeah.
Both the service provider side and the vendor side, everybody wants to make it happen, but it's just a monumental problem. We're changing everything, how everything's done. So it's a big problem, but we're learning.
Yeah. No, that's great. I mean, obviously, you guys provide a lot of, I guess, a little reality to the situation, because we talk a lot with vendors, and they're always trying to push what they've got available now, and they'll claim that, hey, this stuff is ready to go today. You talk to the carriers; they're obviously a little more conservative about it, but it's always good to kind of get a mix of both to kind of see where we actually might be, because you're right, it is kind of hard at times to parse through, all the hype around this, because again, it's been talked about for a few years now, and the hype cycle it seemed like we were probably at a big peak of the hype cycle, probably, 6 months ago or so. But I think we're maybe in a more of a reality phase now, where people are realizing, yeah, this is a lot of work. There's a lot going on here that's going to need to be kind of worked through, even for small little parts. And so it seems like, yeah, obviously we're kind of working through those different cycles of the deployment cycle, I guess.
Yeah. Well, another interesting trend in the industry is, if you look at size matters.
Sure.
Let me just say it that way. The bigger you are, the harder it is to make changes, and you have to pick off these contained domains. On the other hand, there's smaller operators like Colt, who really wanted to make this happen, and they had the earliest virtual enterprise CPE deployment. Mm-hmm. But they were on this track of modularizing their network in 2009. It was their vision before SDN, that word, came about, and before NFV. So then also, if you look at PACnet, is a relatively small and very focused Asia carrier, Pan-Asian carrier. Telstra just bought them in part because of what they had done 2 years ago. They had their Ethernet services running under SDN. Not a lot of people heard about it. And they were a smaller group. They wanted to be more agile. And they only had a smaller set of services. They had business and data center interconnection and business connection. So their business was much simpler than an AT&T or one of the big operators. So, but they again made the decision from the top and got services running. And then KVH, part of Colt, now officially part of Colt, they've been acquired. They had the same owner before, but basically they did the same thing. They were a little after PACnet in terms of getting actual deployment, but their vision was the same. It came from the top. They're very focused, mostly the same kind of competitive business of data center interconnection and enterprise connection. So it was an easier task for them to say, let's go change everything. But the commonality for both of them being smaller, having a focused business, and direction from the top, commitment from the top.
Yeah, like you said, I guess in this case, size matters as perhaps a bit of a detriment, because again, the bigger, you're right, like you're saying, the bigger you are, the more difficult this is to kind of run through the system. I mean, obviously, the big companies that are making noise, AT&T and Telefonica and DT, and those are large corporations who are, obviously, to get this all through the system. I mean, AT&T has said they want to have 75% control by 2020, I think is what it was. I mean, that's, it's great to putting numbers out there, but that's a monumental task, because like you said, those are huge organizations which are kind of set in their ways, and so changing the mindsets and all the legacy equipment they've got to kind of run through. I mean, those are tasks. I mean, this is not a greenfield deployment here. I mean, those would be much easier. So,
yeah.
Oh,
if you don't have a dream, 75%, we'll see if that happens. However, to have a push goal like that and to publicly state it for the world to see, and also the employees, everybody knows, real, we got to change. I mean, AT&T really made, if you look at their announcement starting a couple of years ago, they said, our people's jobs are changing. I mean, that's one of the biggest impediments. And they said, people are going to have to, some of their jobs are going to go away. The goal of this is automation. We're going to automate a lot. We're going to remove a lot of errors because of it, and we're going to bring agility in because of it. However, jobs have to change. So AT&T announced that there were classes set up in Atlanta, at least, so one of the major locations of AT&T. But basically, they were saying, we're going to help you, employees, where if you're willing to go to the classes and learn the new skills, we'll have a job for you. Leaving the blank space of those that you don't want to change, do not have a job, But the writing on the wall is clear. And that's, top management again. It's not the CTO saying, oh, wonderful new technology. We have a way to save, bring in agility, automation. It's the CEO. It's the board level that knows this is happening and is committed to it.
You're right. That's very, very brave move by them to do that. Because again, put the numbers out there. Because again, we're always going to revisit them when their numbers, and when you put it out there, it's always a challenge. I know. Just recently I was at the CTIA show, and I met with AT&T there, Margaret Chiosi there, and she again put out the numbers as well. So they're sticking with their numbers. They like them. They're on track for them. So we'll see. Like you said, but we'll see how it plays out longer term. But it's good to have a goal. Like you said, you gotta.
It's gutsy. It's gutsy and inspirational for the whole industry, for them, AT&T, as well as the industry.
Yeah, for the vendors. I mean, it puts everybody on point that, hey, this is serious. There's a company that's going to spend money on this. So, we might also put some equipment out there and make this work. That's a big part of it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Well, obviously now the financial aspect of this is also a challenge too. I know you guys have done some forecasting on what you guys expect, at least in terms of spending on this. I guess as you look forward, I mean, your forecasts show, still a relatively small market today, but not to say it's not a good market, but still a smaller market. But your forecast at least shows some significant growth going forward. I guess as you look forward on this, I mean, you guys do seem very bullish on the fact that this will be a big spending item for operators going forward, it seems.
Yeah, it's a real commitment, and it takes financial commitment,
Sure.
Right? So, but I want to point out that, we have for SDN 5.7 billion spending in 2019 by carriers around the world, and NFV, it's 11.6 billion spending in 2019. That's, what I say, 17.3 billion total of carrier commitment. However, it turns out that most of that is not new revenue. The new revenue, so part of that's for routers and WDM equipment that is SDN under the control of SDN. It's revenue that carriers are spending already. Yeah. I mean, for example, a router to become SDN enabled, open flow interfaces and logic in the routers is software, and the router vendors are not charging some new fee to make their routers SDN enabled. What they're doing is the next software release, and they've already all done it. The next software release has OpenFlow capability and some other intelligence in the software that allows APIs to do SDN controls or asking for information. This stuff is getting added software-wise. Some of it will get added to hardware later, but it's not going to be a separate line item at all. It's a function of the equipment. So we've identified, like $1,200 a port for a router port and something similar for WDM ports that are SDN in use, or they're in use. So it captures something that represents some sort of investment, real investment on those ports with the equipment, but it's not new revenue. So that part of the revenue, it existed already, and it's not new, but it's captured in our number. So what is new, of course, is all the SDN software and the NFV software. That is brand new. There's no doubt about it. And there's professional services that are required, really, in reality, that carriers are paying the vendors for. So, yeah, there's new revenues in there, but the bulk, over half of it is not new. So the spending is almost, it's not ancillary, it's not insignificant, it's something, but it's not a big impediment at all, really. AT&T drop a couple billion off of their capex spending, saying a big reason is, hey, we're automating stuff, we're using SDN and NFV, we're gonna make a change, and to show that commitment, we're cutting our capex. Oh my God! So
I guess that is kind of the challenge of this, because you're right. I mean, it is a growing market, but it's a growing market that's basis is really saving money. And so you're right. So there's, it's kind of a catch-22 there. I mean, obviously for the vendors, it's somewhat of a new revenue stream to an extent, but it's also replacing previous revenue streams that they were used to getting in the past. Yeah. So it's an adjustment for them. And I know it seems like a lot of the bigger vendors, are going through a lot of internal changes and kind of how they're generating revenues. It's kind of big, almost bigger for the vendor community, because they're having to redo their whole business models as well, in terms of how they're going to approach their carrier partners with this, because the carriers want open source and they want to be multi-vendor and things like that. But the vendors, they try to lock everybody in as much as they can. So that's kind of a big change too.
Yeah, no, that tension is going to remain. But you've seen, or we've all watched Cisco over the last 3 years. First, well, let's just say that they've gradually moved to be really more open in the way people want, the way the carriers want. Carriers, Deutsche Telekom, AT&T, others publicly say, if the big vendors don't cooperate in this game, we're going to stop buying from you. And they're serious about it. So that includes Cisco routers. So, and Juniper, Huawei seems to be, fully behind SDN and NFV. And yet most of the router companies are still making their money off of hardware. Hardware is still absolutely necessary. And as we go into the future, more of the SDN capabilities and NFV capabilities even will be put into the hardware, but you won't be something extra you buy. It's going to be part of the hardware. But it'll become, definitely routers will become more, if we'll call it SDN optimized. They'll have more capability of being controlled by not their own router control plane, but outside software.
Yeah, that's a great point. Obviously AT&T, I know, just talking to them, like I was saying earlier, they've said that, if there's stuff that they are not getting from their vendors, they're willing to almost just do it themselves. They're really putting the screws, it seems, to say, hey, this is what we want. If you're not on board, either we'll do it or we'll bring in a lot of new companies who are perhaps new to the telecom space, but have been in the data center space for a long time, bringing a lot of people in with their domain program, a lot of new companies involved that they're doing. So yeah, it is definitely changing the market, and the tension you mentioned is, you definitely can notice that when you go and talk to vendors. It's under the level, it's under the, a little bit under under the scenes there, but you can definitely tell it's there. That's for sure.
Yeah, especially on the NFV side, there's a lot of functionality that goes into software that can be produced like a Metaswitch and the firm networks that AT&T initially named in the and TailF, who now is owned by Cisco. Small software companies that the carriers really like because it's software that already runs on servers. And I think AT&T said something at one point, they had talked to 1,000 companies.
Yeah.
Well, they had done the speed dating with at least they had narrowed it down to, I forgot the numbers, 50 or 100 that they were working more closely with. But that was proof that they did it. And then they talked about it to the big guys. So you're not in this alone, folks. And if we can't get it from you, we're going to get it from somebody else. Yeah,
it's definitely a changing market out there. Well, before we wrap up the conversation here, I guess as you look forward a bit, obviously you've mentioned already a lot of the challenges still laying ahead for this move towards virtualization. Even some questions about whether timeframes will be hit and stuff. But I guess as you look forward, do you see that the current timeframes that people are talking about, are they realistic? And then also, what are perhaps the hurdles, maybe the major, maybe near-term hurdles that you see, and perhaps maybe as something like a long-term hurdle that you see that still need to be kind of tackled before we get to meeting those kind of deadlines and timeframes that are out there?
Yeah, there's some big ones sitting there. I think basically, you kind of nailed it, that we're out of the hype cycle down in the Gulf of reality or something. We're headed in that direction. But I think especially with all of the operators that have tried to move from POC into commercial service and just found, there's so many things. And even with a small project, a small piece, contained domain, they still have run into a lot of problems. I think the bigger, and I've done this, I stood back and looked at what does a carrier network look like in the year 2020? And the grand scheme is the goal is automation, and you achieve that by having some kind of uber control and orchestration of the whole network that knows what all the services are available in the network, that knows what all the services are in place in the network being delivered now, and that then on the whole network-wide view has to communicate with something that knows about what is the actual network, what are all the products there, and so what's in use. You have to have, if you want to put a service in place, you have to have bandwidth on certain routes for a certain service. So, and all this stuff is supposed to happen automatically. So these big views have to be of the network, and I call that the orchestrator of orchestrators. But in reality, the big orchestrator of everything has to then communicate with other orchestrators of the domains, like IPVPNs, like mobile backhaul, like consumer broadband, like data center interconnection. So there's a lot of the specific parts of the carrier network that an orchestrator needs to have specific knowledge of what's there and what are the services there, and then to appeal to some kind of controller for that part of the network. And so this is where the difference between orchestration and control happen. So then the controllers actually talk to the equipment and communicate with them and tell them what to do in order to effect the service that is being pushed down to that network area, network segment of the network, to the orchestrator. So as what's happening today is the proof of concepts really are taking maybe as much as, in the case of some Chinese carriers, mobile backhaul, the whole thing. But we're seeing more likely some people are doing a little bit of consumer broadband. Mm-hmm. A lot of operators, the majority, are trying to put in place what's known as virtual enterprise CPE. So the ability to take the firewall, the WAN optimization controller, the carrier-grade NAT functions that are now delivered via a physical edge router, now move those off onto servers. And that's basically and move some of that router mm-hmm. logic off onto the server as well. You still have to have the physical server to move packets. You still have to have the physical router to move the packets, prioritize them, tell them where to go, all of that. But the services, 3/4 of the operators are currently planning to move those functions, move many functions off, but they're finding it difficult to do. So let me back off a little bit here and go back to saying there's multiple orchestrations and multiple controls. So the proof of concepts, like a virtual enterprise CPE, they're focusing on one issue. They can solve that. They can go put it in the network. Well, so what's happening is you cannot start with this big orchestrator of orchestrators. You have to start with the small pieces. So we're hearing orchestration, great, and control, great. It's always of a small piece of the network. Yeah. And so what I see happening in the future is, how do we get to that 2020 vision of the grand orchestrator of orchestrators, the Uber orchestrator, if you will? It's how do you automate the whole network? You need that, rather than just automate this piece, then this piece, and then this piece. So the coming challenge is what some people are calling multi-domain orchestration. Mm-hmm. So how do you coordinate IPVPN and mobile backhaul or something? Mm-hmm. How do you take two parts that are initially implemented in the network, where POCs move to commercial live deployment? Now, how do you get those to be controlled from a bigger view? And they're calling that multi-domain orchestration. So that's a minor version of orchestrator of orchestrators, but you have to start small. So how do you do one or two or three different domains, like the router domains for IPVPNs over the optical domain? That's one that's being done now. Yep. That's just a little piece, one piece, and you have to walk before you crawl and crawl before you walk. So Did I say that right?
Crawl before you, one of those. I think we know.
Yeah, anyway, before you run. Now you walk before you run. So we're not running yet. We're not even walking yet. I think we're crawling.
Yeah.
But over time, and it's going to take several years to get there. Now, how does multi-domain orchestration happen? Orchestrators have to talk to orchestrators. And that's a lateral protocol. Oh, who's working on that protocol? So we have a ways to go. So I think and the problem I think that carriers are seeing is that when they commit to an Ericsson or Huawei, a Cisco, or somebody to do this Alcatel, to do the POC and move it to commercial deployment, now they have something in the network, and usually there's a prime vendor. There's somebody and usually that prime vendor has the orchestration software, kind of the controlling software. It's kind of like in the old world, whose router do you buy? And then they're in control. But now, whose orchestration software do you buy? Who's the prime vendor? And they're in control of that part of the network now. And once something's implemented, it's really hard to back out and say, differently, we now have a grand scheme across everything. So I think there's vendor lock-in, at least at the level, even though there's multiple vendors, NFV parts, there's vendor lock-in for that prime vendor.
Yeah.
And, it's Huawei, Ericsson, it'll be the new Nokia, Alcatel, and then NEC and Cisco. I may be leaving somebody out. I hope I don't sell somebody short. But it's those big vendors that have the capability with professional services, with labs where they can bring, big carrier says, Deutsche Telekom says, we want the following software. We want you to have this orchestration for SDN, this orchestration for NFV. We want this. And then they want everybody to be able to swap in and swap out. But those big carriers, where do they do all of that? They want to be able to go to a vendor who's willing to be the prime vendor, though they won't own all the parts. So it's bigness is an advantage, as it always is. Sure. So here again, size matters.
Size matters in a different way there for the vendors. Yeah, you're right. That's a great point. It is interesting how this is all going to play out, because again, it is, people are trying to reinvent the wheel here, but they're realizing, I think, that the wheel that we already have seems to work pretty well as well. So it's definitely a different challenge what's happening out there. That's for sure. And it seems like it's going to take definitely a few years for this all to kind of play out. That's for sure.
I think it's going to be a lot of years. So I think it's the magnitude of this change is like moving from TDM to packet. And, we've already been longer than 10 years in this process, and we're not done yet. So now we're just barely starting the SDN trail, SDN and NFV. And back in the early days of moving from TDM to packet, a lot was already defined. IP, TCP IP was already defined. TDM networks were in place. How do you start using packets with TDM? You start running packets over TDM, over SONET. I think the technologies were more well known, is what point I'm making. Today, we're still creating. What is orchestration? What do controllers do? I mean, we're still getting into it. So I think this one, it's going to be a longer startup and a longer finish as well.
That's a good point. We didn't even get to the point, all the standards issues that are still out there when it comes to these technologies as well. I mean, when you have a multi-vendor environment, they have to be able to talk to each other. And so, we didn't even get into that part. And that's a whole nother 2-hour conversation there, I think. But that challenge
is a big one. I mean, every carrier says we want standards. But on the other hand, we can't wait for standards. They go choose an ecosystem and get things going. And then there's the DevOps, the point of all of this is to be more agile, to have a lot of automation. It means instrumentation of the network. It means analytics, immediate analytics. I call that small data. And then feed that back into policy, have that information available so you can change the QoS SLAs so that your high-paying customers will get the SLA that they bought. Also, it's traffic. Well, how's the traffic moving around the network? Well, this is some connection is getting overloaded. How do you get feedback immediately, and you really want it to happen automatically. The traffic starts getting rerouted. Yeah. You don't need that. You don't have people. It happens so fast. You don't have people involved in it. So there's all sorts of things that there's still a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's probably the main takeaway for most people who are watching this is the fact that, hey, this is obviously it's a great move by operators, but this is going to take a while. A lot of moving pieces involved. That's perhaps not, I think this is going to happen next year. So it's going to be a multi-year, a multi-billion-dollar move by a lot of companies. So we'll see how that all plays out. Well, hey, Michael, we appreciate the great insight on this. Obviously, like I was saying, this is a topic we can probably talk on for several hours, but we'll save our viewers some time here and not go too deep into a lot of these things. But again, we definitely appreciate the great insight today, Michael, on the time and everything today. So much. Thanks so much for the time today.
Thanks, Dan.
Great, and hopefully we'll talk again soon on the topic as well. Well, hey, again, thanks everyone for joining us on this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, and make sure to check us out again next week.
NFV SDN Reality Check with Dan Meyer is a production of RCR TV. To suggest show topics or to reach Dan, you can find him on email, dmeyer@rcrwireless.com, and on Twitter @Meyer_Dan. For more Dan, news on NFV SDN and everythingrwireless.com.